right, thank you very much. Well, that was an incredibly moving presentation. Thank you for doing that. I don't know that following it with a regional economic update is, I don't know what I can do to do a good job here, but I will try. I was asked to give you a little bit of an idea of what's been driving the economy and what's happening in San Diego and what to expect in 2022. And so with that, I'm going to do that. The San Diego economy in 2021 was absolutely driven by COVID. That has been the one factor that has really dominated everything that's happening. When you take a look at the different variants that are coming up, every time you hear news about this, there's new government action that happens, and you see the economic influences of that. You see major economic disruptions in the labor force also. We see places like McDonald's and Chick-fil-A offering $18 or $20 an hour for people to basically flip hamburgers. And they can't find people to take those jobs, even though our unemployment rates are at record levels. We have 11 million job openings right now, and they can't be filled. We have housing prices that are going through the roof, even though people are unemployed. But we have mortgage interest rates that have come down significantly during COVID, making housing a little bit less expensive for some people, and therefore more people jumping into the market. And COVID has pushed a lot of people into thinking about purchasing houses and moving out of the urban core and into the suburbs from a national level, not as much in San Diego, but we see housing prices going up. And then the biggest impact that I think COVID has had is inflation. And inflation is something that we haven't had to deal with in 20 or 30 years or more. And what we see now is inflation, not only this year, this is not transient, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that during this presentation. This is something that we're going to be dealing with for years to come. When we look at the consumer price index, for instance, everything is up. And a lot of this has to do with COVID and the supply chain issues that I'll talk about in a minute. But as of October 2021, consumer prices were up 6.2%. You've heard that. New vehicles were up 9.8%, gas and energy up 30%, food up 5.3%, but fast food is up by 10 to 15%. I mean, have you gone out to dinner recently and gotten your bill and thought, did I get the wrong table? You know, I've done this more than once where I look at it and I go, I cannot believe that taking one person out to dinner, for instance, it costs this much. It's like what it cost for like a family of 4 just a year or so ago. And these prices are going to continue to go up. And a lot of this has to do with the chaos that we have in the supply chain. So the backlog of cargo ships is underestimated. There are ships now that are docked 150 miles offshore that are not counted in the ones that are backed up in Long Beach trying to get in since October. And there are reports that you can see these ships from San Diego. There's that much of a backlog of cargo ships to be unloaded. And there's a shortage of 80,000 drivers and trucks to move these goods to market. And this isn't because consumers are buying too many things. This is a disruption in the supply chain that is going to take some time to work through, and it's going to be measured in years. It's not going to be measured in months. So sometimes I hear reports where, the supply chain, this is not a big deal. We're going to run the ports 24/7, unload all this stuff. We're going to take care of it. It's going to be gone. It's not going to happen that way. Consumer goods shortages. This is something that's been a long time, if ever, that this has happened in the United States, where you go into a store and you simply can't buy a good. Nobody has that on the shelf. And there are consumer goods shortages from everything from cream cheese to maple syrup to packaging material to put wine bottles are in shortage. I mean, the most bizarre things that need to be brought into this country to facilitate the supply chain are short, and this is leading to huge problems when it comes to purchasing things. Christmas this year is going to be difficult too because there's a toy shortage. A lot of them are offshore, a lot of them aren't coming. And then of course cost increases with more dollars being spent on all of these goods and services. So when we take a look at consumer prices year over year, it's up in September, this graph shows 6.5%. You see that it's gone up more than it has since 1990, or well, 2000, sorry. So in the last 20 years, this is the highest rate of inflation that we've seen in consumer prices. But this is very much an underestimate of what's happening. because there's also this concept of shrinkflation. And so if you go to Costco, for instance, and you buy a roll of paper towels, there used to be 168 paper towels in there. Now there's 120 paper towels, but the price is the same. So that means the cost of the good is actually 22% more expensive. Cereal boxes are smaller. Potato chip packages are smaller. If you take a look at the items, what's happening is that the manufacturers are putting less there. They're not raising the price, but it is costing you more money for this. The other problem is the producer price index. A lot of the consumer prices right now are based on what producers purchased their inputs to their supply chain last year. But now the producers are going to have increased cost in fuel, et cetera. And as you can see from this graph, producer prices have gone up 8.6%. These impacts are not going to be felt until next year when those goods come out. So if somebody was buying potatoes at 30 cents a pound, for instance, last year and making potato chips or French fries out of that as frozen food, and this year when they contract for those potatoes, they have to pay 30% more for that. That's going to show up in the cost of goods next year. So this inflation that is being talked about sometimes is transient. It's only been in the last week or two that I've heard people start to say, maybe it's not transient. It's really not transient. This is going to be with us for a while. Construction cost index is another thing, up 14.3% in terms of construction. You remember the plywood debacle of last year, where sheets of plywood were costing $100, a 2x4 cost $15, ridiculous. And a lot of that has to do with supply chain, but a lot of it had to do with manipulation too of prices in some of these commodities. So causing a lot of problems in the construction market. When we took a look at the communities that were most impacted in San Diego, what this map shows by zip code pre-COVID, what the unemployment rates were. So pre-COVID, we had unemployment rates of about 3.2%. And then at the height of the pandemic, where a lot of people had been let go, which was April of 2021, we had unemployment rate on average about 15.9%. And as you can see by the colors, that there are some areas that had higher concentration of unemployment. And really, it's the areas over here that were over 20%. Okay, it was down here in National City, down in San Ysidro, the border area over here. You see lighter blue, though, up in the Carmel Valley area and in the high-tech areas, because those are the people who were able to telecommute. The people who worked over here worked in industries that required you to be physically going in. The retail, the hotel motel industry, for instance, the tourism industry, those were the hardest hit industries. That's where the people lived who work in those industries. So you see higher rates of unemployment. Fast forwarding to October of 2021, and what you see is that although the unemployment rates have come down, these areas are still hardest hit. Okay, we have most unemployment in the South Bay region. When we take a look at employment during recessions, and this is something that I look at on a regular basis to try to understand when we're going to be coming out of this recession. Okay? And technically, we're out of the COVID recession. It only lasted 2 months. But I think that there's a disruption that has continued. And when we look at employment during recessions, the blue line shows what happened during the 1991 recession. Okay? And it took us about 4 years to get back to the same employment levels that we were at when that happened. And that's kind of a normal recession. The Great Recession, which was the biggest recession we had since the Great Depression, took 5 years to get back to, and that's described by the orange line over here. And you take a look at what happened with this latest COVID disruption. We had employment fall by about 20% in the early days, and then you see that you have a pretty sharp recovery, and that was when people were talking about a V-shape. Remember the V-shape recovery? No, it's going to be a U-shape recovery, or there's all these different terminologies. What's happened is that we never actually have gotten to recovery. Right now, where we're at is exactly where we were at the Great Recession at the bottom, okay, in terms of unemployment. So that's how bad it is in terms of employment. But you don't necessarily feel it because it's not distributed equally, and because of the incredible government intervention that's occurred, it doesn't feel like other recessions because there's a lot of money that's being pumped into the economy to keep it going. One of the problems that we have also over here is that this COVID disruption has gone on so long that what you have had happen is that a lot of people in the maybe 50-year to 55-year-old or 60-year-old categories, those people have taken early retirement. Just kind of like said, I'm out of here, okay? Then you have a group of people who are coming out of college for the last couple of years who never actually worked a real job in a work environment. They may have gotten a job telecommuting, but a lot of them were unable to get a job. And then you've got this middle part between 30 and 45, which now has the Great Resignation. We have 4.2 million people nationally who are quitting work, just quitting work each month. These things were unheard of. Go back up 2 years ago. Everybody we talked about, everyone had a job. We were looking at full employment, things like that. Now all of a sudden, you've got all of the people on the plus 50-year-olds who really have the experience to run a lot of businesses, right? They're the ones who have the knowledge, and they've left the workforce. You have the ones who are right behind them who could possibly take their jobs walking out in droves, and you have these young people who want jobs or want to enter the workforce who are not qualified to take any of the jobs. So even though we have a high unemployment rate, we have 11 million job openings right now, we have high unemployment, we can't match the people with the openings that are out there. And for any of you who have tried to hire anybody in the last couple of months, do you realize how difficult it is to find people who are actually qualified to do the type of work that you need? This is going to take a while for us to work through as an economy because those people just aren't out there. So we're going to have to figure out how we go forward after this kind of settles out. We took a look at the hardest hit sectors to understand what was happening in San Diego. And the hardest hit sectors here were, is not surprising, tourism, and because it's one of the largest sectors here in the San Diego region, along with education and retail. And so we are still down by about 109,000 jobs in the region. About 75,000 of those jobs, almost 70%, are in those three industries. Now, the education industry, people have gotten burned out. Teachers don't want to teach, so they're leaving their teaching positions. The tourism industry has been significantly affected, especially hotel, motel, airline industry, et cetera, and it hasn't recovered. The other thing is that two of the three of these are very low-paying jobs, and you'll see what the impact is in just a second. There are a couple of bright spots. Innovation and construction have added jobs during this COVID crisis, and the rest of the industries have fared relatively okay. This is employment by income category, and so this is indexed to 100. I know it's hard to see the numbers, but at the beginning of the the pandemic, it's indexed to 100%. The green line shows you those people who earn below the median wage, and the red line is above the median wage, and then blue shows you just the median wage. And what it shows here is that those people who are in the higher earning categories have all but gone back to work. Okay, those jobs are filled. We basically are 1/10 of 1% below where we were in terms of employment at the beginning of COVID. But when you come over here and you look at those that are making below $37,000, so this is kind of the minimum wage category, about 1 in 4 people who are in that work classification are still unemployed. Okay, and so this is extremely important because this is what's driving all of the demand on the bottom side of the economy, where you have the fast food, like I described earlier, where every fast food restaurant has a sign, they're looking for people. Restaurants can't recover because they can't hire people to work. They're in this category over here. The question is, why aren't those people going back to work, right? And a lot of it is due to the fact that with the amount of stimulus money that was pushed into the economy, these people don't have to work. And I know that this is true from in a lot of different categories, even college students who've decided, I'd rather take the stimulus check and study for school than to work. So there's a lot of reasons that people have traded this off. But the problem here is that we have to get these people back to work somehow, because the economy needs that particular class. So what that's going to do is really start to force up wages on the bottom end, and we've already seen that happen. This graph shows nominal wages from 2007 through 2021. This is in the actual dollars that you're earning, and you can see that wages have gone up through 2021. But when you correct that for inflation, this shows you what has happened in terms of hourly wages. I used to use this graph back in 2018, so forget this part of it, just take a look at that part of it, to show that there was very little growth in real dollar terms when you corrected for inflation here in San Diego. Basically, an index of 102 means you'd have a 2% increase over a course of about 11 years to this point. So less than 2% increase in real earnings after you have 10 years more experience, okay? And that was for the highest quartile of earners. And when you took a look at the lower quartile, you see that basically you were making no headway at all. So this was a problem in San Diego for a long time. But look what's happened since COVID. All of a sudden, the real wages have started to go up, okay? And that's a great thing for consumers that their wages are going up, but the corollary is that prices are going up faster than the wages are going up. So people are really not getting ahead. Even though they're making $20 an hour now, everything is more expensive proportionally to the point where you're actually losing in terms of standard of living. This is another huge problem. As we start to have to pay higher and higher wages, someone's going to have to pay for that increased wages. It's going to find its way back into the price of consumer goods and services. And so that starts to feed inflation again, and we start to have this spiraling effect. It's going to take a lot of policy and a lot of time to slow down. This is another interesting concept that is really out of whack that was born out of this latest COVID disruption. This graph shows consumer spending, and you can see before COVID, which is the little area that was kind of just bopping around zero, that's consumer spending, which makes a lot of sense. People spent, it's indexed, so people are spending about the same amount of money. We go into the COVID lockdown, everybody stops spending money, okay? Then we start coming out of COVID, and these indicate, these are stay-at-home orders. These indicate stimulus payments, and so what ends up happening as the stimulus payments started to come out, we saw more and more spending, and now here we are in a position where we have highest unemployment that we've had in a long time, okay? We have 11 million job openings, and we have consumer spending that's through the roof, yet there are tons of people who are unemployed and they don't have jobs. So, and prices have gone up significantly. How do you make sense of this? And this is what happens when you know, all of the natural forces within an economy are disrupted by intervention. And I'm not blaming anybody, because I know everybody tried to do the right thing during COVID, but this is like throwing a big rock into a pond and trying to see, you know, how long it's going to take to clear. Spending is up 16.2%. Okay, again, this fuels inflation. People are buying stuff. Okay, and what are they spending that money on? They're buying durable goods and they're buying non-durable goods. So they're buying stuff which we can't get in because of the supply chain, right? And so people are outbidding each other for the goods that are there. So this is kind of like this whole spiral effect where it keeps being tied together. It's a very interesting time to be an economist. Housing and utilities people are spending more on it, and financial services. Where they're not spending as much money, healthcare, accommodations, food services, transportation services. So this is airline and flights. Okay, obviously restaurants, hotels, healthcare. A lot of the elective surgeries people have put off. And guess what? People aren't getting as sick because people aren't in groups where they're getting sick. I mean, when was the last time anyone here had an actual cold? You know, I mean, forget COVID. It's like you don't even get a cold anymore, so there's no reason to go see the doctor. So we have spending has completely changed in terms of categories. So the interesting thing here from the work that I do is that one of the things that SANDAG administers is the half-cent sales tax that goes to fund transportation programs here in the region. Like we built the trolley extension up here to UCSD. Well, we thought that our sales tax revenue was going to go down significantly because I would think that as people lost their jobs, they'd be spending less money and therefore we'd be collecting less sales tax. That didn't happen. We actually have the highest tax collection that we have ever had in San Diego, and we're collecting about 20% more than we had expected. It's because people are buying all that stuff, and all of that stuff is taxed. So it's amazing to see what's happening. Nothing matches what one would think of as an economist. This is the spending sectors since basically this year, and what's happened is that the entire economy has picked up, and so you see people have spent things everywhere, but still durable and non-durable goods is where people are spending most of their money. And housing is the last section that I want to talk about. I know you were behind on time, so I'll make it up for you here. So the housing prices in San Diego have continuously gone up. We're now looking at housing prices of around $823,000 for a average price house, which is up about 13%. And then the expectation is that we may be up about 16% next year. So that would be the forecast. And why is this? One of the reasons is because we have low interest rates, and those interest rates are being kept low right now by government policy, right? And so the thing is that they use that as a tool, and at some point to cool inflation, they're going to have to start to raise interest rates. So we're going to probably see something happen here next year. But as long as the prices or the interest rates are low, you're going to see people borrowing tons of money and using all their Bitcoin profits to purchase houses, right? This shows you the housing affordability in the San Diego region. It's a very interesting slide. The green shows California, the blue is San Diego. Before the Great Recession, housing affordability in the region was about 9%. That means about 9% of the people could afford to purchase a median priced home. So a lot of people were in houses that they could not afford to buy. If you think about the price of your house right now, think about whether or not you'd be able to purchase it today. And in a lot of cases, you wouldn't be able to do that. All of a sudden, you saw affordability skyrocket because we went into the recession. Remember, all the housing prices came down. They were dirt cheap. Unfortunately, what happened, it wasn't San Diego residents who purchased those houses. They were investors who would buy them and flip them, and they'd come in and purchase them for cash. And so what happened was we didn't increase like housing ownership percentages. All we did was we went through a market correction where a lot of people who flipped houses made a ton of money. So housing affordability was up to 46%. The people started to purchase those houses, prices started to go up, and now we're at about 22% housing affordability. But how does that tie back to personal income here in the region? So I've talked to you about what's happening with wages and such. The median income here in the San Diego region is $66,000. Okay, so half the people make less than that, half the people make more than that. So people who would make $66,000 right now could afford to purchase a house that was $315,000. I mean, how many houses do you know in San Diego region that are $315,000? There's zero, right? Okay, Texas, there's a lot. Okay, so when people are moving to Texas, 66,000 could buy a house over there. It takes so then if you take a look at dual income, okay, so two people who would be married or partners who are going to purchase they want to purchase a single family house, they can afford $623,000 if they're earning the median income, okay? Not a lot of houses available for even $623,000. The median price home in San Diego at $823,000 requires a $159,000 household income to be able to purchase that house, to take the mortgage on that, okay? Which means that the majority of the people in the region still cannot afford housing. And that's one of the biggest problems we have here in San Diego. This last graph that I'm going to show you is residential permits that have been issued. Remember back in the 70s and 80s, for those of you who are here, we used to build housing by, you kind of go in and you just flatten a whole area and you put in Mira Mesa, right? And then you flatten another area, you put in Rancho Penasquitos. We were building up to 40,000 or 50,000 units per year with a much smaller population than we have currently. And so what happened is that we'd build a bunch of units and then the housing market would crash, right? All of a sudden you could buy houses. I mean, there's like 25% vacancy rate and people would move into new subdivisions and what have you. Those houses would eventually be absorbed into the economy and the developers would start building again. And so you have this kind of a cycle. And that kind of went on until 2000s, okay? This shows you the averages for the different decades, but look what's happened since the Great Recession, okay? And a lot of that has to do with land use changes in the government regulations, I'll just say that, okay? Where they don't allow you to necessarily put in subdivisions the way that we did, and now all of the development that we're doing is really infill, and so it's much more expensive to do it. So even though there's a tremendous demand for housing, we're probably short over 100,000 units here in the region. There's nobody who's really pulling permits to try to build those. The situation has gotten to the point where we cannot build the housing units that we need. So we have about 63,000 units short during this time period that we weren't building to keep up with our population growth. But then we had the advent of Airbnb. And all of a sudden, you've got people who decide they're going to compete with hotels and motels by taking their houses off the market, essentially, and renting them out. And that's great for the person who's doing that, but it reduces the housing stock here in San Diego. Okay? And when you take a look at the fact that we have vacancy rates in places like Coronado that are 25%, or in La Jolla, and you go, well, then why aren't people living there? Well, they're second homes. Somebody owns that home. They're just not in it all the time. And so when you factor out those homes as not available to San Diego residents, and you take the Airbnb ones out, and you take the ones we haven't built out, we're short by 100,000 units. And that's why you have such incredible increases in prices and amazing amounts of demand and an increase in rent. And so as of mid-2021, even with the mortgage interest rates being as low as they are, we've only been able to build around 7,000 units, okay? Not nearly enough to make up for any of this demand. So big problem in San Diego. I know all of the government agencies are trying to take care of this problem because they know how to fix the free market. So, I hope I'm the only one who works for the government who's here. So, it astounds me how people think that we can just create a law or a policy that's going to take care of a problem. Every time you do that, it creates a problem somewhere else. And I've tried to explain this and map it out 1,000 times, but I don't know. It just doesn't go that way. So, what to expect in 2022? Okay, I think you're going to see COVID continue to drive the economy. It doesn't. We can have this Omicron variant, which now turns out to be a big bust in terms of it's not really getting you that sick, right? And at least that's the early feedback. All they have to do is mention that there's a new variant, and the stock market crashes. Okay, so this as long as this is all in the news, you're going to see this continue to drive the economy. I think it's going to drive it all the way through 2022. I think you're going to see slowing rates of inflation because we're going to have, people are going to think that it's ridiculous to start spending this amount of money, and they're going to pull back some of those consumer purchases because that's really where a lot of these purchases are happening. But I think you're still going to see higher than average inflation rate for several years to come until that can actually be brought under control. I think you're going to see continued high rates of unemployment. As long as there's alternative sources of getting money, people are going to now people are just walking out of their jobs. So you're going to see a lot of people who are unemployed. And I think that starts to kind of mellow out in 2022, where everyone who's going to quit is going to quit pretty much, and then you're going to have people starting to return to work. And so hopefully we get back to something normal sometime at the end of next year. There's going to be a sharp increase in wages, and that's going to be at every level because businesses are competing with each other now to get employees. And as I talked about earlier, we have huge gaps and in certain areas of expertise, and so businesses are outbidding each other, and a lot of this is in tech and in healthcare, so you're going to see a lot of increase in wages there. Businesses are going to continue to struggle because uncertainty is bad for business, and what we're going to see is uncertainty for the next year. I also think we're going to see a reduction in disposable personal income, and I think that ends up really reducing the standard of living for the average person. Of course, there's going to be winners in all of this, right? But the average San Diego person is going to end up at the end, when they look back, they're going to have a lower standard of living that they had before. Housing prices are going to continue to stay high, and I think that interest rates are going to continue to stay low. Any attempt to try to raise interest rates could slow the economy, which causes the economy to slow, and then you've got other political issues that are wrapped around that. So we'll see what happens there. And I think you're going to see continued federal intervention. I don't even think that I shouldn't even put up that because that's a given, right? They're going to continue to intervene in what's going on. And as long as that happens, what ends up happening is that we're going to have all of these actions that occur that have these unforeseen consequences, and that's going to continue to make the economy a very interesting story in 2022. And so with that, I will wrap it up, hand it back to you. Thank you.
All right, we got time for two questions, two quick questions real quick. Mr. Tim Cowan. the low-wage worker, the minimum wage, I still don't understand why they're not coming back to work. I mean, they're, $20 an hour at McDonald's. You mentioned this because of fiscal stimulus. I think what you mean by that was the enhanced unemployment benefits,
Yeah.
which all ended in September. When they compared it to states that didn't offer those enhanced employment benefits, they didn't come back there either. They're not coming back now. Where are these people? You had a big blue unemployment rate under that area of the county. Where are they? Why aren't they coming back?
Well, in part, I do believe that it was the stimulus payments because people were getting money that they weren't working for. And now a lot of people also don't want to take a $15 an hour job. Their thought about what employment is different, and they're simply not working. And so a lot of those people, for instance, students have decided to concentrate on their education, and they make up a lot of that workforce. Okay, there are a lot of businesses that, for instance, the tourism industry, where those jobs haven't come back either. So these people are unemployed. So, and they're in the ranks of the unemployed. That's where they're counted right now.
One more. All right. Loud enough so we all can hear you.
So it's two questions combined in one, so I only have one question. So number one is jobs, and the other one is population growth.
Yep.
So I'm assuming now that San Diego's become a more diversified economy, that projections moving forward is that per capita income is going to increase in San Diego than previous years because we're going to get an influx of higher paying jobs from these other industries that are coming in, creating newspapers. And how does that filter into your projections?
So
Repeat the question if you could, so everybody can
he's
hear
asking
it.
two questions that have to do with jobs and population growth, with the premise being that there are high-paying jobs coming to the region, so per capita income should be increasing. Well, and
the second part of that is, in your stats, with everything that's happened with the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, people are shuffling around, moving to different states. In the state, what are your numbers showing? People moving into San Diego, are they coming from other cities within California? Are they coming from other states? So if you could kind of elaborate
Sure.
a little bit on that as well, and moving forward.
so right now, the projections for the growth in the San Diego region have been significantly reduced through 2050. So we're looking at a population of about 3.7 million people. That by 2050, we're at 3.4 million people now. Okay, that used to be as high as 4.5 million people. So significantly less growth. And so with that, we're going to have less job growth over that time horizon. That's the long-term forecast. There are high-paying jobs that are coming in, but for every high-paying job that we create in the region, we also create two low-paying jobs. So we create one in the retail industry, roughly, and we create one in the military industry, which is in general, it's a low-paying job. And so what happens is that they kind of start to cancel each other out. We've seen some increase in per capita income, but it's not enough to bring up the entire region. In terms of where the population is going, there's an exodus from California. I think you've probably read about that. There's an exodus from San Diego also, but we have an influx of people who are coming from other parts of San Diego, because comparatively, San Diego is a cheap place to live when you compare it to somewhere like the Bay Area. And so you see people who are migrating down that direction, and then you see people from San Diego moving to places like Arizona or to Texas. So we're seeing some of this migration happen. One thing about San Diego that's kind of unique, though, is that once somebody gets here, they really don't want to leave. And so we saw that during the Great Recession, is that instead of people leaving the region, what they ended up doing is they took a longer commute. There were a lot of people who would start to work either in Orange County, and they would make that commute, or they were actually working in Chicago, for instance, and they would fly back on the weekends. But once you've established a home, and your kids are going to a school, and your friends are over there, it's really hard to move, and especially if you're in a place like San Diego, which is still one of the most desirable places in the United States. And so we don't see as much migration as we would expect from other places.
All right. Give it up one more time. Great. Thank you very, very much.